Welcome back to the 90s podcast. Chad, we're becoming like best friends now. Just you and me hanging out, talking about these people who we have so much high regard for. It's been a great journey.
It has indeed. It has indeed. And man, there's so many exciting things going on behind the scenes that we're hopefully going to be partnering on that we can't even talk about yet. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
hard for me to contain. But what we can talk about is the 90s Worship Podcast. And I couldn't be more excited than for our guest who kind of wrote the soundtrack of my 90s experience, I think would be fair to say.
Okay, I have a little story about Andy Park. Andy Park is with us today. So Andy's listening in. We don't have him on camera yet. He doesn't know I'm going to say this, but here's my take on Andy Park. I'm a worship leader of a fledgling church in Walnut Grove, and we get the announcement in our, local pastors that Andy Park is coming to town and he's going to be the worship pastor at a church about two, blocks away from us. And I was like, how am I going to survive if Andy Park is two doors away? I just want to get off the stage and go to his church. So I was like dealing with all of these things. And then I was putting on a whole worship night and I heard that Andy was coming and I was just like freaking out thinking, I don't know, what's he going to think? How's that going to go? And I remember he came up to me and he was so encouraging. We ended up getting to lead some worship together. And then as years kind of went on, he invited me to come and play golf with him and just hanging out. And now I find him to be a good friend and real down to earth and a great influence on the history of modern worship that this whole podcast is about. So he's much less intimidating to me now. Let me just say that. He's a regular guy with a huge voice and influence in so many great stories. So there you go. That's my take on Andy. Do you have any history with him? Have you met him? Have you talked to him a few times? Of course you have through the docuseries that's coming out.
Yeah. Andy and we had a great interview probably about a couple years ago now. Man, we gotta get this docu-series out right. It's like now I'm like, oh, 5 years ago when we had an interview. No, but hopefully that will be coming out later this year. But yeah, just so many great narratives. I know we'll get into a few today, but I
Yeah.
am just so excited because probably like of the episode one of the docu-series about Lyndall Cooley and the Brownsville revival. Uh, Probably at least like we did a whole sequence on two of Andy's songs, and those are probably my personal two favorite sequences of the entire episode. So
Yeah.
really
So
excited
great.
about that.
Well, why wait? Let's bring him in. He's kind of smirking. I can see him right now in my monitor, and he's like smirking at these stories. He's like, I don't know why I signed up to talk to these two guys, but we'll see. Should be a good time. Here we go. 90s Worship Podcast with Andy Park. Well, Andy, do you want to go through with this? I don't know, hearing
Oh,
us,
sure. Yeah, let's have fun. Yeah, talk about the old days.
the
Yes.
good old days. Well,
Tell some
Chad and
great
I were
stories.
just saying, Andy, that it seems like you're a voice. Certainly people know you as a worship leader, but I don't think people realize how much you kind of lurk in the background of so many voices that we would be familiar with, like, Brian
Right.
Dirksen and Lindell Curley and Jeff Deo and so many where it's like, well, we don't see your face in that, but your songs are there and your presence. You've had a mentoring impact on a lot of these worship leaders. So I think Chad and I want to say, first of all, thank you for what you have invested into, like even us as modern worship leaders of 2025. Many of our contemporaries won't even remember or know the kind of impact that you've had, but I know that, and I just want to say thank you to you for investing in us like that. So yeah.
God bless you. Yeah, we all do our part, right?
Yeah, we all
Just
do our part for
yeah.
sure. And now, you're a father of how many kids? 8 or 9 kids? I can't remember how.
8 kids and 4 grandkids and one more grandkid on the way.
Wow, so fantastic. And I'm thinking most of those kids, because I know some of them, they're growing up. They're not little kids anymore, right? Obviously, you got
Oh,
grandkids and stuff, but just thinking
yep.
this whole era of you leading worship, you know, in California, in Vancouver, and across the world and touring, you're raising 9 kids or 8 kids through that season. How did you do that?
Yeah. Well, I have a super wife. She's an
You
amazing
do.
lady, and,
Yes.
there were a few years there when the first 3 became teenagers, 3 boys. I had to do only shorter trips there for a few years because they were just all getting into their crazy teen hormones years.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a very long-lived period. But yeah, she can juggle a lot of balls at the same time, and
Yeah.
she homeschooled them for many years, and so she's an amazing lady. And
Yeah.
without that, none of that would have happened, obviously.
No, no. And I can only imagine that being a father, obviously the father's heart, if you think about vineyard worship just as a whole genre, I think vineyard, I think father's heart. Those are just words that easily pair together. I think there's, whole album series that were kind of built around that, but that's not just
Yeah,
a title or a brand. It's actually like you lived that out. I know we were just talking to Brian Dirksen last week. He has 6 kids and just a wide variety, a spectrum of needs in his family, and developing that home life father's heart is probably at a foundation of all that you are as a worship leader. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about that? Tell us, give us a window into the Andy Park family and being a father like that.
yeah. Well, I mean, in a more general way, even,
Mm-hmm.
just been thinking even a lot in the last few weeks about from books I've been reading, just reinforcing the most basic thing that we are here on earth to learn to love well, right? And
Yeah.
we keep learning. I've asked God to help me continue in that journey even now, and there's a long ways to go yet. So, but uh, it was definitely, I mean, it's challenging whether you have 1 kid or 8 kids or however many, because having kids calls you out of your self-centeredness, and
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
learn about serving others to a much greater degree.
Yeah.
You're just, and so I never would have imagined when we got married that we would end up having 8, because my wife came from a divorced family. And so
Hmm.
she didn't have a vision for raising a family until we moved to Canada. And some people that Ryan, Gary and Joy Best,
Yeah.
my wife, observed them raising their kids with God's love and just having a lot of meaningful value in the act of parenting. And so she caught a vision. Linda caught a vision, and then she really ran with it, and she would have kept going and beyond 8 if I
Yes.
hadn't. Okay, maybe we should call it quits now. And but it's just the grace of God, and I certainly wasn't a perfect father, and
Yeah.
none of us are perfect, but my kids are turning out pretty good. They're better than pretty good.
Yeah.
They've had a lot of love poured into them, and we all of us who raise kids, we have some seasons of greater difficulty, when uh, certain ones are in their teens or even their 20s. They go all kinds of wacky, crazy directions, and they're trying to figure out who they are and
Yeah.
making mistakes. And I think, one of the biggest things we did is we just kept loving and showing grace, and we were there to listen when our kids were just struggling through how do you become an adult in this world,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's the old one day at a time thing, and there's a lot of fulfillment now, and like thinking of kids that they were far from the Lord, maybe 10, 15 years ago, and now they're really close with God, and they're
Hmm.
model Christians, in many ways. And so,
Yeah.
uh, yeah, so it's just the old one step at a time, and
Hmm.
trusting God, and making mistakes as parents, and
Yeah.
learning from our mistakes,
Yeah.
uh, and having good friends around us that could give us good input, at key times
Yeah.
to
So good.
on how to do stuff. Yeah.
Chad, as I'm listening to Andy speak here, and I'm thinking that the opportunity we have here to speak to someone who has like lived the faithful life. If there's some young worship leaders who are maybe 20, 24, 25 years old, they like got the world by their hands, but what are they going to be like when they're 60 or 65? Like, are they going to run the full race? And Andy, I feel like you're able to kind of give us a window of someone. I think of people like you, Paul Balash, even Brian. I mean, so many of these folks that we are interviewing, the story of their lives is that they stayed the course, they stayed faithful, and it wasn't just a hype thing. This is real life, even just as you're just saying, Andy, about at some stage of your life, even your kids were not so close to the Lord. I mean, I'm imagining out of 8 of them, they're not all going to be in a revival state all of the time, and how you grapple with that as a dad, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's you got to be realistic, and
Yeah.
uh, everybody has their own way of working out their faith too. And I mean, we have several of my kids are involved in worship leading, and
Yeah.
and and others that aren't doing it now. We're doing it for many years,
Yeah.
and but uh, everybody has their own unique story, right? And
Right.
and
Right.
some some people struggle more than others,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we anybody that has more than one kid, we know every one of them is unique,
Yeah.
and
For
so
sure.
that's
Hey,
how
could
God made us.
you just, we want to get a few, I know you are full of so many great stories and relationships and experiences that you've had. Can you take us back to your world when you were a kid? Like when you were, I don't know, whether it's 14 or 18, or when was the season in which something sort of broke loose in you, and whether it was your father or maybe someone was like that father figure in your life who called something deeper and more unique out of you. Can you take us back to the beginning of when that kind of started to break into a new direction for you? What do you
Yeah,
think of
sure.
when I ask that?
Yeah, in my high school years, in fact, my entire childhood, God was just I believed in God as a passive entity, God Almighty. And so my responsibility, being raised in the Episcopal Church in Los Angeles, I just knew that the golden rule, basically, do good to others, and there's no personal relationship. But when I started at university, that's when things started to happen. I actually read a book
Hmm.
just in the summer before starting university that opened my eyes to the fact that I could know and experience God's love and know
Hmm.
Him as a person. So, right from the very beginning of my first year at university, uh, through the input of various campus Christian organizations, and some close friends who spent time with me, that's when my life just, I entered the worship life. And I
Hmm.
actually stumbled into a vineyard like that very first fall season, when I was 17 years old. I'd never written a song before. I never aspired to write a
Yeah.
song. I was a shy kid who didn't like to perform in front of people. I like to play my guitar in my room by myself, and
Right. Yeah.
but God started revealing Himself to me, as a teenager, and I just started writing songs almost right away. Uh, and it's sort of the classic story. You wander, in my case, into a vineyard church, and I just knew I was home. I knew I
Hmm.
had found something that I wanted to be involved in the rest of my life. Little did I know that I would end up writing thousands of songs and traveling all over the world, and
Yeah.
that was completely a surprise to me, years later when that began to unfold. Although God did give me some hints that some stuff was up, and so yeah, it was just being immersed into a culture. I actually, just for my first year at UCLA, I was in a Christian fraternity house. And so there's a lot of strong Christian brothers there who really influenced me. And yeah, and then so I grew tremendously in the Lord during my university years. And yeah, I mean, I made the mistake, I think, that many of us do. When you find real faith, you become critical of others who are not in that place. Unfortunately, as classic beginner's mistake, and it took me a few years to get over that, and then
Yeah.
to figure out it's all grace towards me, and it's not that I was more holy than anybody. God just invited me into knowing Him by a complete gift, and
Yeah.
so. Yeah, and really everything in my life. I mean, I have worked hard, but it's all a gift. Every song is a gift.
Yeah.
Whether it's one of those, drop out of the sky and it's done in 30 minutes kind of a song, or whether it takes 20 hours, over a period of 3 years, it's still God's gift, and I'm enjoying continuing that now. I'm writing a lot, recording a lot of songs here in my little home studio, and so
Can you
yeah.
take me into the some of the early days when you had a touch point with John Wimber, the late John Wimber? I mean, he was such
Yeah,
a massive, of course, influence in the whole Vineyard worship, but he must
yeah,
have been a part of breaking you into a new sense of relationship with God and ministry. I mean, tell me about some of that experience that you had alongside him, because I don't know if there's many worship leaders that came up close and personal alongside of John as you did. Do you want to give us a window into
yeah.
that?
I first met him. See, I was in the Vineyard in West LA with Ken Gullickson, and I was a intern pastor for a year. And so, first times I met him was when we went down to Yorba Linda, where his church was. We went to Sunday night service, went to a barbecue at his house, but then fast forward, I moved to Canada in '85, and later that same year, they needed a worship leader for an event in Vancouver, so I was asked to do that. And then immediately John started inviting me to go lead worship in various conferences in the US and in England and Ireland and other countries. And so he was super encouraging, and you know, those were the days where we were in very large rooms. He was speaking to very large numbers of people, and God was really doing wonderful things, healing people. People were being equipped on how to
Hmm.
pray for others, and uh, John was not perfect. He was like all the rest of us. He had an enormous amount of responsibility, so he was not a perfect man, but he was pretty good at saying he was sorry when he made a mistake, and
Yeah.
uh, and yeah, that was one of his strong suits. He didn't think too highly of himself. One of his
Wow.
most famous lines was, "I'm just a fat man trying to get to heaven." And he didn't like being called Pastor John. He really preferred John. Just call me
Yeah.
John.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, he was managing the growth of the Vineyard internationally and in the U.S., and the music company, which in those days was going like gangbusters. So yeah, he was super encouraging, and
But
I
what was
heard a lot of his.
his heart for worship? Because he, in
Yeah,
particular, like that was obviously a high priority for him, investing into you. But he was a songwriter himself. I don't even
yeah.
know if he led worship or he just wrote some songs. I'm trying to think of what's a song.
Well, his
What
song
song?
praise
Yeah,
song, Son of God, this is our praise song. That
yeah,
Maranatha used that for years as their
yeah,
theme song on the Bible radio teaching program.
yeah.
Isn't He is one of the
Right,
biggest,
isn't he?
yeah,
Yeah.
which is, and he was, yeah, I mean, he was the musical director for the Righteous Brothers. And I mean, at one point,
Ah,
before he came to Christ, he was still in the secular music world. He was at the beginning of Elvis Presley's career. He was invited to produce a song for Elvis, but John turned it down. It was before Elvis had made it
broke.
big.
Yeah,
But John, another very key formative piece in John's history is that his first church experience was in the Friends Church, otherwise known as the Quaker Church. And one of their ways of worshiping was just by sitting in a room, everybody being quiet and just listening to God, and everybody waiting to receive a word from the Lord. And so he learned from the beginning about the value of listening and what is God saying? What is God doing? And he well understood the human energy that could create a spectacle on the stage, and therefore making the band or the singer the focal point.
yeah,
And so, and that he knew that because of when God came to their little home group, which was their first vineyard ish kind of experience, God showed up in a way that they had never experienced in their life. They didn't even have a grid for this whole intimacy with
hmm,
God thing. And so John jealously guarded the preciousness of that intimate contact with God. And he knew that all of us musicians, we're there's there's a tug of war that's happening. The performer part of us, wants to take over, and yet the worshiper part of us is the part we know needs to win out and really needs to drive what we're doing. And so once in a while he would say to the band, "You guys are playing too many notes," and
hmm,
it and so because there's this value of if you pull back in your intensity, you're more leaning into listening. And
yeah,
recently I took a course on contemplative prayer and the history of contemplative prayer, and I find it interesting that one of the big influencers in that field, Thomas Keating, he wrote a book in the 80s called Intimacy with God, which was all about centering prayer. It's listening prayer. It's ancient contemplation with some modern technique and guidelines. And uh, so I find that fascinating that God was moving across the whole body of Christ in the Catholic Church and in the Vineyard in the 80s, and the theme of intimacy of God was becoming much more widespread. And so yeah, it's I mean, so many incredible stories of encountering God, and
hmm,
in whether it's in big conferences or in little home groups, really.
yeah,
And
hmm,
it's a tremendous amount of water under the bridge, and lessons learned through those years, because of course one of the big things that happens is when you get elevated to a higher and higher platform, your ego is challenged more and more to submit to God, because
hmm,
there's a natural human tendency to want to capitalize on your visibility for the wrong reasons,
right,
and so
right,
uh,
huh,
and having walked this many years now, easier to rest and abide in that, but when, you're always around big stages, on big stages, you're being tempted to compete with others who are
Yeah.
on stages, that's, you have to deal with that stuff. And
Yeah.
so thank God I kept making some good decisions along with my, mistakes. And
Yeah.
so that's what helps you survive the long haul.
Yeah. Well, kind of like I was saying, when you were hearing us banter before you came on about when you came to town, Andy, I don't know if you knew that, I found it a little intimidating. Is like, how am I going to ever compete with, a guy like yourself? And yeah, to your credit, you've shown yourself to be like so down to earth, so inviting, and and sharing in a community of worship leaders, even as we did in the little walnut grove that we lived in together. So those
Yeah.
were those were great years. I'm still a part of that church that I was a part of in those early years. I kind of went and to other churches and then came back to that place because it's
Mm-hmm.
and I want to tell you this, Andy, too, that I'm sure Chad can also attest to this, that what the Vineyard brought and what you brought through, along with other worship leaders in the Vineyard, that sense of intimacy and sort of like taking the pretense off the band, and suddenly it just became about like, what could you do just on an acoustic guitar and some simple congregational voices and just let that rise. You somehow brought validity to that, brought the longingness that we had to I don't know, not have to perform so hard. And what you're just sharing even right now about listening, I think, man, I want to think about that even on Sunday. I'm leading worship, and I just had an amazing worship practice last night, but I was thinking, I wonder if I'm leaving enough space on Sunday to listen, like, how could we do that?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
Chad,
Yeah.
what's your thoughts? Like, what's your experience of that shift in you that came from this particular intimate era of worship and what Andy has brought? Uh-oh. Did we lose his voice? He
Sorry.
clicked
Sorry
mute.
about that.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Sorry about I had
He
a
was just
coughing.
listening, taking it in.
I'm still getting over this terrible cough, Ryan, that
All
I've
right,
had
no
for the
problem.
last few weeks. So I muted it. So sorry. But no, I mean, for me, it really was, and I think I had told Andy this, I first got involved with worship ministry when I was 15 years old at the beginning of 1996, and was immediately exposed to just a ton of multicultural worship, because there was just so much out there in the church that I was a part of. I mean, that was really what was ministering to us at that time. And, I was just, like I said, 15-year-old kid with an acoustic guitar trying to really make sense of it all. And it really was when I first, got exposure in mid 1996 to Vineyard, and Andy and Brian and, uh,
Hmm.
you know, Scott and all of them. Yeah, that's
Mm-hmm.
when it kind of clicked, like, okay, I get this. This is applicable to what I'm able to do and what makes sense to me. And I know that I wasn't the only one, because soon after, that's, in my opinion at least, that's kind of where the shift of stylistically where worship music went, was in my opinion very directly related to the Vineyard movement.
Hmm. So much.
Yeah. Yeah.
So good. And there's another person that I'd love to just hear some stories about as you think about the early days and your influence and kind of coming alongside John Wimber, but then this guy, Lindell Cooley, who, wasn't really part of the Vineyard. I don't know what denomination he is, just, super. He's part of the revival generation, like, or the revival
Yeah.
denomination, if you want to
For
call it
sure.
that. But
Assembly of
you
God Church.
yeah, Assembly of God, but he's become so well known for that era of the very late 90s. Something went on in Brownsville. Most of us just read about it or heard about it or tried to experience remnants of it in, like, I know for us in Langley, where Andy and I live, there were remnants of that kind of revival going on that were most assuredly influenced by what was happening in Brownsville. But Andy, you were there. You led there. They were even singing your songs. Your songs were a part of triggering that movement. Can you give us a little window as to how did you become connected into that, and what was that like? I just want to hear a little bit of a story from that era.
Yeah, we recorded a Winds of Worship recording down there, and yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed. See, I love gospel music, even though that's
Yeah.
not what I do. I mean, my song "We
Well,
Will
we
Ride,"
will ride. Yeah.
that was their theme song.
Yes.
It's right out of
What
Revelation
what
19, and
and how priceless. I mean, what an awesome.
yeah,
I mean, that
Yes.
rendition on Wednesday Worship 7. That's just such a fun song, and like you said, kind of more along stylistically of
Yeah.
you know that
yeah,
gospel
and
style.
that reflects, like I was a teenager in the '70s, and so there was all kinds of great gospel music and other black, like Motown,
Yeah.
like people that were famous in black music that grew up in church, and so they brought in their gospel influences to their R&B, and
Yeah.
I loved all that kind of stuff. So
Hmm.
that's in my musical roots. And but Lindo, it was so fun to watch him gospelize some Vineyard songs, like "Holy and Anointed One,"
Yeah.
you know, bam, bam,
Yes.
with the big shot, and
Yeah.
it's great. It's culturally contextualizing it for his world, and he brought a great energy to that, and it's a really fascinating story how his pastor went up to the Toronto meetings and brought the Vineyard music back to Lyndall and said, "Here, I want you to do some of this." And it was not Lyndall's kind of music, but
Right.
the Lord used it to bring a fresh wind of some kind, and so, but Lyndall had the humility to, okay, I'm open to this, and so, I mean, I can't imagine having to lead worship, whatever it was, 6 nights a week that he was doing for, I don't know how many years that thing went,
Yeah.
but that is
5.5. Yeah.
very,
Yeah, for those
that
of
is
you who have
very,
to
very,
lead 3 times on a Sunday and are complaining, you got to listen to
yeah,
this story.
yeah, it's so intense, and
Yeah.
all those people lining up for hours and coming from all over, not just all over the U.S., but from other countries, and so it was just fun. I mean, it was a very power packed experience. I remember, like, I did my song "Spirit of the Sovereign Lord" with like a
Hmm.
hundred person choir standing behind me, that was a wonderful experience. That was, nothing like a gigantic choir like that. And
Hmm.
Yeah.
yeah, and then the whole crazy "We Will Ride" phenomena. That like I could, on the earlier podcast, Lyndall was sort of almost making fun of it a little bit. A song about a horse. Well, that horse is Jesus riding on that horse,
That's
and so
right.
it
It is.
does have
That clip's gonna go viral, Andy. I just
Yeah.
know it. I'm so excited for folks to see it. That is my favorite sequence of the entire
Yeah.
episode.
yeah. Anyway, actually, here's a funny note about Wimber. He one time after a church service, he said, "Andy, I really like your songs, but I don't know about your horse song." He was talking about "We Will Ride" because it was very unvineyard like, and
Yes.
actually when
Yeah.
I wrote it, I think I told you the story, Chad, on that interview
Yeah.
from a few years ago. It was a spontaneous song,
Yeah.
and but then when I heard it a year later. To my shock and surprise, I didn't know it had even been recorded. This was in Germany. it was recorded, and then I was eating dinner at a friend's house, and I hear this song. That's me singing that song. Where I didn't even what. So then I started doing the song, and then we arranged it with the gospel style. But there is, I mean, Jesus is calling us to be part of His army of love,
Yeah.
and that's, and then you combine kind of the American cowboy thing, which was completely not my intention, but well, that is going to happen for some people. They relate to the horses, right? So I mean, it's just a crazy thing that God used,
Mm-hmm.
and so some of the songs I've written that ended up really working, I was very surprised that they went anywhere,
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think
life is full of
that's what
surprises.
makes you so appealing in the whole story is that it's almost like you're hardly even aware of yourself. You seem to have no desire for, glamour and you're slightly introverted, as you have said that you are. So it's like you're not
Yeah,
looking for the attention. You're not looking to be like the life of the party kind of person. You're not really looking to compete, for the big stage. But then it's so ironic that that's actually the person that we are drawn to. It's what we want. Is we want someone that doesn't want, the
yeah.
limelight. And I
Well, I mean,
wonder. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I definitely had to battle that though, big
Yeah.
time,
Right.
because all of us want to be appreciated. We all of us want to be loved
Yeah.
and admired. And so it was not without a lot of just relentless repentance. You just
Hmm.
have to keep turning away from that desire to be greater than others. That
Yeah.
and and yet you cannot then throw your gift away. And
Yeah.
so you have to keep using your gift, and then just completely hold it open-handedly and trust God for what He's going to do with your efforts. Whether
Yeah.
it's leading worship for you know an outreach to the poor, or a small
Yeah.
church or a big church, or whatever. It's I'm just going to keep giving,
Yeah.
and let God sort it all out. Yeah.
Right.
So
Well, I feel like it's such a good message for. I hope that there are some young, aspiring modern 2020s worship leaders who are listening to this story who can sort of capture some of this of a man who's kind of gone through the full ages, who's played the full big stage, has got that kind of like grand perspective, and just being faithful, and like you're saying, that tension, that's fascinating to think about. Like, I can't deny the gift. I have something to offer. It's gonna put me on a stage. I can't just not do that.
yeah,
But then how do
yeah,
I and it is a wrestle, like you're saying. It's not like you could just decide, oh, I'm just gonna be humble this morning. I'm sure you had some mornings where you're like, man, I'm a pretty big deal. Like, people all over the world are singing my songs. Like, oh, wait a second, I need to challenge that, or you need
yeah.
that's a wrestle, right? That you would
Hmm.
have. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so what's it like nowadays? I'm imagining you're not living in an era now where the big stage is it, or maybe it is. I don't know. Is that a regular part of your life, or does it feel like that was history, or what's it like to be in this season, looking back on
Yeah.
that?
Well,
Do you ever feel like it was
yeah.
an era that passed you by and it's in
Well,
history, or
it was definitely like, I'd say over the last 15 years, really, it's definitely a purifying experience, because now then the question becomes, okay, are you going to keep using your gifts even though the platforms are smaller? And then, of
right?
course, with COVID, then all travel stopped, and
Yeah.
but I've gotten back into it. I was over in Hong Kong and Korea last fall, and
Hmm.
I've been here and there, and going over to Asia again in next fall, and but not, a few big churches here and there, but not usually.
Right.
But I'm influencing people, a good number of young people involved in those events I did over there, and in the here in Canada as well. And the other thing is uh, really just the wonder of the internet and the fact that I can post songs on YouTube, and collectively with all the different platforms, I'm, thousands and thousands of listens or views per month are happening.
Hmm.
So I'm not there in person,
Yeah.
that's not how the internet works, but
Yeah.
it's satisfying to know whether it's my older or my newer songs, people are benefiting from those, and so that's just the world we live in, and I mean, traveling takes a lot of energy, and there are some incredible high points, and uh, but some of it can just be hard. Like
Yeah.
I don't have the luxury of travel bringing a band with me. So you work
Right.
with musicians, whatever musicians you happen to get in whatever church you're in. So
Right. Yeah.
that can be hard work, and
Yeah.
it actually works out great. As long as you're super flexible.
Yeah.
And as you realize, you come with an attitude to serve and to impart to younger worship leaders along the way, and just worshipers in general.
Yeah.
And so, and it's part of it is just the joy of creating and the joy of doing music. And so, like Ryan, you're probably familiar with Night Shift. So
Hmm.
I have
Hmm.
a band that we're tomorrow night's our first night there. Five of us playing for an hour during that meal for the poor, and that's a really wonderful experience. Not without
Yeah.
its challenges, but there are some amazing moments of the Holy Spirit touching those people,
Yeah.
and there's no church rules, so we can do
Right.
whatever
Yeah.
we want. We can do covers of whatever, Bob Dylan, U2, other any songs that bring God into the picture, and then mix that
Yeah.
in with worship, and that's a lot of fun.
Nice.
So part
Yeah.
of the joy of doing music is it really doesn't matter who's listening, what kind of a crowd. It's just God made us to create
Hmm.
and to use our gifts, and there's fulfillment in doing that.
Hmm.
And as long as you take all the conditions off of your, okay, I'm only going to play in this kind of a situation, and
Yeah.
if you're willing to go and serve wherever God has you, then there's a lot of joy you can
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
So
I see that in your life. I know about, like night shift, Chad, you may not know about that, but like these are places where you have like the least and the lowest of the low of people, who are just in pure desperation. And I mean, Andy, sometimes they're just there really they're there to get a meal. And then,
yeah,
and then suddenly there's worship in front of them. And sometimes you've got to press through just singing in front of them while they're standing in line to get the meal, what they really want. And then hopefully, they catch something as a byproduct of that. And but you've
yeah,
been faithful, Andy, for so many years, and I know you've written songs that are specifically about the poor, and and reaching them, and it's been part of your teaching and just a part of your whole character. It really shows the faithfulness that you're not just about the big stage, and that's evident in the full scope of your life and these stories that you're sharing with us. So, and maybe
and
it can be somewhat, uh, just to know, we like, even with this 90s worship, now we happen to be in this era where there is a renewed interest for what was going on in that era that you were a part of shaping. It hasn't been forgotten. Like people like me, people like
Yeah.
Chad, we're looking back, just like some people also look back at the old hymns, but there is even some substantial
Yeah.
value in looking back at what happened in the 90s. And obviously, Chad, you're just dedicating so much of your life to telling these stories. So, Chad, do you want to just give us a little window as to how Andy fits into this series? And is there any of his songs that are coming out? I'm not sure if Andy's songs in particular are on the first album, but just give us a window of how that fits in and how 90s Worship will continue to tell these stories related to Andy.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I mean, it all starts with episode one, telling the narrative about the Brownsville revival and
Yeah,
everything that happened there. Because I mean, that's just such, to me, a seminal moment of the decade. And I really look at Brownsville kind of being a microcosm of '90s worship, because as you were stating, Andy, I mean, Linda was just like, they were just doing it all kinds of styles of music. It was just all going
Hmm.
through kind of that Brownsville filter, if you will, and just going out to the world. I mean, it kind of served almost as like, the
yeah,
purpose of what YouTube does today, as far as
Mm.
just, really promoting the songs and exposing people, to what worship was. So that'll be an amazing episode. We're covering, I think I said before, with Spirit of the Sovereign Lord, and We Will Ride specifically. We have two full sequences about one for each of those songs.
mm-hmm,
And then we're going to be later doing a full episode about, just the legacy of Vineyard and of John Wimber, and really excited because we have, several, and Andy knows this, he helped me connect with several
mm-hmm,
of the individuals who will be part of that episode. So we'll have that. And then, I'm really excited about, and I didn't get a chance to tell you this yet, but we're, well, actually, we haven't even announced this, so maybe I shouldn't be announcing it. But we're doing a big event, and Jeff Dio is going to be a part of it.
yes,
And we're
Good.
doing an episode about Jeff Dio and kind of the whole origin story of Sonic Flood.
yeah.
But we're going to be doing a big event, and Jeff's going to be leading worship, and I think he's going to do In the Secret for like the first time in 25 years.
Cool.
And
Great.
just
So great.
celebrating that legacy.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
there's a lot of fun stuff on the horizon. But again, I mean, just so many songs. And Ryan, you and I'll have to, we still have
yeah,
to do our top five, our
yes.
series of top five, videos just about
Mm.
all the '90s songs. But it's gonna be hard to pick my top five favorite Andy Park
Yeah.
songs. But I mean, definitely Spirit of the Sovereign Lord, We Will Ride,
Mm.
Mm,
Yahweh, In the
mm-hmm,
Secret, Blessed Be
mm.
Your Name.
Keep
Those
going.
just immediately roll off the tongue, but there's so
You
many.
know, the thing, Andy, is most people just get to be a part of like one episode in this this whole 90s worship series, but somehow you find a way to lurk your way into 3 or 4, because it's like this is what Chad and I were just saying before is you're just kind of like lurking behind so many phases of this. And it's not just Vineyard, because obviously it was in Brownsville, and then Jeff Deo with Sonic Flood. It's not like you're a one, just one style, one denomination or whatever. Your
Mm.
influence is broad, and that is going to come through. Sometimes it's not your face; it's just your song or your presence, or
Sure.
the mentoring that you did for some of these people. So it's an incredible story, and we're
Mm.
grateful for your faithfulness, Andy, and
Thank you.
just keep going the distance. Finish out
Yeah.
raising those kids and grandkids. Now I'm a grandpa too, so I know that world. It's what a joy, hey? Seeing the next
Yeah.
generation coming up. There's nothing
Yeah.
like it. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Right
Yeah. I
on.
appreciate the chat, you guys. It's great to see you, and great to hear about what you're putting out with the '90s worship stuff. So
Awesome.
it's great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Chad,
Th- th-
you are the grand hero of all of this. You're the one really laying your life down, and I think these are great stories to share. So thank you, Chad. Thank you, Andy. And we're going
Hmm.
to we've got more episodes. I think we're doing Paul Baloche next. So that's going to be super fun. He is another just giant of a mentor and influencer and songwriter, just from a whole nother generation from the integrity side. And so I'm looking forward to that. Stay tuned for more stories. They will keep coming out in the 90s Worship podcast, and looking forward to when eventually the docu-series will come out. This is all just like a prelude to this incredible thing. So Chad, I'm sure you're looking forward to that.
Good.
No one more so than myself. I can promise you that. So
it's coming.
We'll get out.
In the meantime, you'll just have to put up with us two, guys on the 90s Worship podcast. This is what we got for now, but it's so good. Awesome. All right. See you all later, and stay tuned for next episode. We'll look forward to it. Thank you, Andy. Have yourself a good one. See you then. Bye.